This podcast is sponsored by Quartz IP. For more than 20 years, the PracticeLink IP operations platform has helped some of the largest IP practices in the U.S. simplify and scale high-volume IP operations. PracticeLink is designed by IP teams for IP teams, bringing smart automation to mail intake, calendar management, and client communication while making sure service to your clients still feels personal. Learn how Quartz IP drives excellence in IP operations at quartzip.com.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to IPWatchdog Unleashed, where each week we journey into the world of intellectual property to discuss the laws, news, policy, and politics of innovation, technology, and creativity. With analysis and commentary from industry thought leaders and newsmakers from around the world, IPWatchdog Unleashed is hosted by world-renowned patent attorney and the founder of IPWatchdog.com, Quinn, who has twice been named one of the most influential people in the intellectual property community and recognized numerous times as one of the top IP strategists in the world. Take it away, Gene.
Thanks, Renee, and welcome everyone to this week's edition of IPWatchdog Unleashed. This week, my guest is Brent Bellows, who's a partner with Knowles Intellectual Property Strategies in Atlanta, Georgia. Brent has a Ph.D. from the University of Alabama at Birmingham in human genetics, and his practice focuses on pharmaceutical and biotechnology patent strategy, including domestic and international patent preparation and prosecution, portfolio creation, portfolio management, and due diligence. We'll talk to Brent about what's going on in the life sciences industry, specifically talking about ANDA litigation. We're also going to talk about clinical trials, the costs associated with drug development and innovation, and much, much more. Of course, as probably goes without saying, the views expressed by Brent here today are his own personal views, not the views of Knowles Intellectual Property Strategies or their clients. But without any further ado, let's jump into our conversation. We begin today with Brent telling us how he got involved in the life sciences industry, and then subsequently how he got involved in the intellectual property community.
When I was in undergrad, I really got turned on to genetics during my course studies. I was actually a marine science major with a chemistry minor and really enjoyed genetics. And so out of undergrad, I went to grad school at University of Alabama, Birmingham in their medical genetics program, which was a little more clinically based than pure genetic research. So it was really the application on the medical side of genetic disorders and such. During that time, I struggled a little bit with one of my dissertation projects and got a little disillusioned. And I have a brother-in-law who's an attorney, and he's like, "Hey, you have a technical degree. Have you ever thought about patent law?" So started looking into it. I rebounded with a great dissertation project on tumor-associated antigens back at the time in the mid-90s. Quickly wrapped that project up, and during that time, we tried to patent a few of our findings. So I had some interaction with the patent attorneys through UAB, which was wonderful. And I got a little bit lucky on the law school end because I came out of graduate school in 2000, and a lot of firms and law schools were starting to build IP practices, especially around the life sciences. So was very lucky, went to University of Virginia on a scholarship, and just really had lots of opportunities in the field coming out of law school as well. Ended up at King Spalding here in Atlanta, Georgia, working with Sherry Knowles, who we all know very well, and went from there. When I first came to King Spalding, I did both litigation and prosecution. And when Sherry left King Spalding and went to GlaxoSmithKline, I actually departed King Spalding for a short period and clerked down at the Northern District of Georgia for Judge Charles Pinnell. And at the Northern District at the time, there was a pilot program for judges who would be interested in taking on more patent cases. And so they had additional clerks. And I was one of those clerks, and I worked not only with Judge Pinnell, but a number of the other federal district court judges in the Northern District on their patent cases. So it was an outstanding experience. I had a few years of practice, so I kind of knew how litigation worked, how prosecution worked, and then was able to see on the other side from the court's view and from Chambers' view what really mattered in these patent cases and these IP cases. And it was just outstanding experience. I mean, I think it was probably the best thing that I could have done. And when I left the court, I went back to King and Spalding and primarily worked on the litigation side, but did maintain my hands in a few of the clients I was working with before I left for prosecution. And then, of course, when Sherry left GlaxoSmithKline and started Knowles Intellectual Property Strategies, she called me. We had months of discussions, and I just really enjoyed working with her when I was at King and Spalding, knew the quality and caliber of attorney she was, and the type of practice we could build, and joined her at KIPS in 2011. So at KIPS, primarily patent prosecution and strategy, a bit of a shift away from litigation, but we do litigation support still, a lot of expert witness work as well. That has been a lot of fun on the patent side. Also involved in expert witness work on the licensing side, and from time to time we'll get involved with Walker process claims that are brought during antitrust litigation. So, a pretty exciting and broad realm of things that we do deal with here. But yeah, the life science is great. I use my Ph.D. and the skills I developed in graduate school at the lab bench every single day. I was doing viral vectors in the mid-90s, and I do viral vectors today. It's just much more advanced and actually making its way into the human clinic, which is for someone like me. My final dissertation project was on melanoma tumor-associated antigens, and to see just the absolute explosion in immunotherapies that were just a pipe dream in the early 90s, it's fascinating to watch. Just absolutely love every minute of it.
So there's a lot there for us to unpack, but what I will start with is now it makes a lot more sense to me even. And I mean, I known you for years. I guess I didn't realize all of the broad-based legal experience you had, because so much of our interaction is really around the life sciences area specifically. But that now makes a lot more sense to me why it is that you're such a good moderator, because you've seen the law from a whole bunch of different perspectives as a litigator, obviously now as a prosecutor, as somebody who does international portfolio development and management. But the clerking is maybe the key, because you've seen a whole bunch of different issues that go beyond the life sciences area. They go beyond the patent area. And that's one piece I think a lot of patent attorneys are missing, is the broad-based understanding of the law.
Yeah, it does help me when I'm dealing with the client, partly on just issue spotting, like any attorney would want to do. But it does help us and our clients recognize particular issues to be aware of outside of the prosecution realm. I will say one of the benefits that I got from clerking was understanding, for example, when a patent case was before the court at the federal district court level, what was involved. And I took a lot away from that experience in what the judges looked at, judges actually reading the patents, which the federal district court, I think they do, recognizing arguments that held up during prosecution, and the story that is told in the patent application itself has a lot of impact on the judge and the jury as well. And sticking to that story from the beginning, I saw the results of successful litigators who wove those initial stories, didn't change it, maintained, the patent office allowed it, etc. Seemed to be somewhat successful, at least at the district court level. And when I draft a patent, I think a lot about that, about the story to be told, why this is inventive, what advantages it has, because the district court judge does look at that, especially when they're dealing with, I think, with ANDA cases. I think that the judges still like the story. They do like, the data showing that it worked. And that's what I have taken from that experience. Also took a lot of things to worry about and things not to worry about, what judges think are critical and what they don't pay as much mind to. And as a younger attorney at the time, trying to, find your balance in the world, lots of paper tigers to chase in the law and in the patent law, and then kind of seeing it in action, saying, okay, this is a point or an issue that I quite didn't appreciate before seeing it in action at the court level, and taking that home versus, these other things that I used to think were exceptionally critical and may not have that same role in front of a judge. So, yeah, I mean, every single thing, as we've discussed, Gene, everything we do at our firm is geared towards that potential. And we represent branded pharmaceuticals and biotech companies. And it's that and it's the biosimilar litigation that obviously we are most keen on building a reasonable portfolio to maximize patent term.
So before we go down the ANDA path, and I will, for those people in the audience who are not in the life sciences area, I'm going to ask Brent here in a minute to explain for laymen what ANDA is and what it means and why it's important. But I don't want to get past what you were talking about, because I think could be a very interesting insight, really, when you were saying that there's some things that district court judges don't find particularly important or persuasive. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but that's what I was hearing you say. And then there's other things that you might think that were not as important, but they do put a lot of stock in. Do you have any examples? I mean, one example that comes into my mind, I'll give you some time to think about it, is this idea, like you have to properly name all of the inventors. And if you don't name the inventors, then the patent is invalid or unenforceable or useless or however you want to characterize it. And everybody knows that that's easy to fix even afterwards, right? Now, I suppose if there's real nefarious stuff going on, but what nefarious stuff is going to go on to the point where a district court judge is going to say, nope, sorry, you lost the patent because you didn't list the right inventors, right? That doesn't happen in practice, although we are taught that that's what the law says. Is that what you're talking about?
That's a great example, certainly, because a judge, as long as, like you say, there's no nefarious aspect to it, trying to keep someone from getting a payment or, reducing potential ownership issues with a co-applicant, things like that. The judges are pretty keen to sharp elbow practices in these situations, but that's a perfect one. The other one, and it has been helped since Theracense and in those cases, is just inequitable conduct. I don't think the judges, unless it's egregious at the district court level, I don't want to say they don't pay much mind to it, but when I was early in my career, that was the thing that I was absolutely just so concerned about. And it's a good thing to be concerned about. And we are very judicious in citing references we're aware of, not overstating arguments on data, providing other types of data that may not be supportive, things like that. We really are careful with our arguments, and we're careful with our arguments in the United States and around the world. But when I went to the court, I had a couple of the judges comment about, at the time, every complaint had an inequitable conduct charge. In fairness, I think the federal district judges who deal with a lot of patents, they understand the patent bar, and they kind of understand the caliber and quality of attorneys at the patent bar, the prosecutors, and that most people are pretty on the straight and narrow on that front. And unless something was just so egregious, which does happen, let's make that point clear, there are egregious cases of inequitable conduct. But the average day-to-day case that a patent prosecutor is dealing with, those making allegations on that front, I think most judges look at it a little bit skeptically. So that was one thing that I came back with. We strive to make sure our duty of candor is made and done on all of our applications. We may have missed a reference. We'll RCE or withdraw from issue if that's the case. And I just don't think long term, at least, especially in the pharma world, you're not going to get away with much anyway. I much rather have the toughest art cited against me so we can argue it and make those arguments and get it through the patent office, just to kind of build that story for the judge and jury as well down the line. So that's one example. Inequitable conduct is certainly one. Markman is another,
Before we go down the Markman path, and I want to hear if you have any stories about that, one of the things that I just want to throw out there and see if it resonates with you is when I first started, I was a litigator. And the litigator who broke me in and used to tell me as a young attorney, don't rush to malice when a good description of what is happening could be incompetence. What winds up happening is more often people are incompetent than they are malicious. And I think that when you were telling the story about inequitable conduct, I suspect that type of thing resonates with the district court judges who let's just be honest, they get lied to all the time. Probably every day they're in court, somebody's lying to them. They get really good at detecting, what is true, what's not true, what is overblown, what is not overblown. And I get that you have to raise inequitable conduct is the silver bullet. It's unfortunately probably malpractice not to raise it. But I can definitely see the judges just rolling their eyes and saying, here we go again, no evidence, and you're going to be wasting my time, wasting everybody's time here. And I just don't think it works.
Yeah, no, and I agree. And I think a lot of the district court judges view it similarly to as you do. I mean, it may be incompetent. Something may have been forgotten. But so many of these district court judges practiced as well. And they may not have been patent litigators or patent prosecutors for that, but they know inequality. They know inequitable conduct in various contexts. So in the patent world, when it's applied and the arguments are made, I think it does raise an eyebrow. Not to say there is not egregious conduct. There certainly is, and we've seen those cases, but those cases are so far and few between, partly because, again, patent is an exclusionary right. If it has value, someone is likely to try to infringe, and you're going to need to enforce it. And the prosecution bar understands that we're not getting away with things. If you've got good litigators on the other side, which I think the patent litigators, in comparison to a lot of the general bar that you see maybe arguing at the federal district court, they're top notch. I mean, they're some of the smartest, brightest people, best firms that are litigating these cases. You're not getting a lot by them. They're too smart.
Yeah, and I didn't mean to suggest that there's incompetent patent practice out there. That was just the way to, a pithy way, I think, to describe, don't rush to the malicious.
Right.
And we all know in the patent world, there's all kinds of reasons why it's not intentional, but something fell through the cracks, not the least of which is, hey, I got taken off that case. The client transferred law firms. The new law firm didn't see it, or everybody's going to die. We don't like talking about it, but if your patent attorney dies and there's a note in the file that says submit this in an IDS, and whoever picks up the file next didn't see it, or the patent attorney doesn't need to die, they could retire. And then sometimes there's just legitimate disagreement as to, well, was that really material, or I thought it was cumulative. And the truth is, nobody likes the ethics police or a district court judge looking over your shoulder. And I do think that the judges probably get that more so than most, because as soon as they hand down their decision, they got oftentimes both parties say, well, we're going to appeal. We're going to take this over your head. And I mean, nobody likes that kind of Monday morning quarterbacking. And
yeah, and I mean, I think that's true. And I think some of the district court judges view some issues in patent law as just, we're going to move this case, and the likelihood of it coming back is pretty high, especially around Markman.
So I'm glad you brought us back to Markman, because I wanted to hear what your insights are, having been in litigation, both as a practitioner but also as a clerk. What insights can you share about Markman?
I think the judges are pretty keen when it seems like certain claim terms are trying to be stretched, right? You have the patent in front of you. They do review it. They do read it. And where you're trying to extend terms to cover things that may pass the smell test on a straight face, but in the long run, the judges, I think, are somewhat wise to that type of approach. And at the same time, it's a matter of law, right? Claim construction is a matter of law. So at least in my experience, when I was clerking, the judges understood that. They tried to be fair to both parties, do the best that they could, follow the standards that were in place at the time, and recognize that, there may be 3 judges on a panel at the federal circuit who disagree with this, and it very well may come back. So I do think the judges were used to that Markman issue coming back. And so understand that, but also when they're drafting their Markman orders, recognize that issue. So that's one of the things on that side. Now, obviously, you want to win at Markman. It's much better, and sometimes it's dispositive. Obviously, in a lot of cases, on our side, it's not so much. To be quite honest, on the small molecule or biotech side, Markman does matter, but the criticality of it is a bit lessened just by the contours of what the litigation is about. Especially in the ANDA realm, where in your patent portfolio, you're trying to cover the label, the FDA approved label, and the methods and indications that are approved. And that's a simpler, more straightforward exercise than a claim that covers some pretty complicated electronic device. On that end, Markman is not case dispositive in a lot of situations in the life sciences area for most cases. Not true for all, but for most cases, because the claims are pretty straightforward in what you're looking at. Method claims, administration claims, formulation claims, composition claims of biological products or small molecules, and it's right there. There's not a whole lot of debate on what a hydrogen is.
And is that because in the life sciences area, maybe more so than in your general patent area, even a high-tech patent area, the science is really driving what is being claimed in the first part?
Exactly right. And the science dictates the success of the patent. If the science fails, the patent goes away. And it's not generally, there's no value if it doesn't work, right? If I've got a method of treatment claim and ultimately the method of treatment indicates through clinical trialing that there's no efficacy, I don't have a claim. I mean, and it just is generally that's how it works. Those patents are dropped quickly. The client moves on to other areas of research and development.
So I want to get into the clinical trial area, but before we go there, ANDA, that's abbreviated new drug application, probably most in the industry, certainly everybody in the life sciences area knows that. But why is this matter? What's really going on for those people who aren't, steeped in this practice area? What's the difference between a new drug application and an abbreviated new drug application? And then why is there so much litigation in this area?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So depending on what the approval is, but I'll use an example of a new chemical entity, a drug that is approved for an indication such as treating cancer. When I get that approval, I automatically, with a new chemical entity in the United States, upon FDA approval, I get a 5-year exclusivity, data exclusivity, regulatory exclusivity associated with that. And what the FDA does, and what Hatch-Waxman Act, which is what brought in the existence of abbreviated new drug applications, what that entails is the FDA requires a branded drug that has a NDA approval, requires any patent associated with that drug to be listed on the Orange Book. And if you list it on the Orange Book, which is an FDA kept database, it details things such as what the patent covers. Does it cover the composition? Does it cover the method of use? The expiration date, any patent term extension or adjustment associated with it. And that dictates what the FDA can and cannot do when they do receive an abbreviated new drug application.
So you as like a big brand, you're doing research in the first instance. You're coming up with something that heretofore has never existed to treat cancer. You have to file a new drug application and go through a whole series of clinical trials and steps that get more and more rigorous the longer it goes and the more the drug seems to be clearing each hurdle. And then the FDA finally approves you. Okay. So now you got approved. Then you get this 5 years exclusivity that you're talking about, right?
That's right. And the exclusivity starts the day the drug is approved. So, and that is public knowledge. Your patents associated with the approval are listed on the Orange Book so everyone can see, and that starts the clock. And if you have a successful drug, you will get an abbreviated new drug application filed. If it's an NCE, it comes at year 4. That's the first date that a generic can file a abbreviated new drug application if there's a patent listed on the Orange Book. And with that filing, there is something called a certification. And there are several certifications that the generic can make in an ANDA. And what an ANDA does, it allows you to rely on the underlying data in the NDA. So that is why it's such a powerful tool. The generics do not have to go back through clinical trials to show efficacy. All they need to show is that the product that they are proposing to sell under an ANDA approval is bioequivalent to the reference drug. And bioequivalency is defined in the statute as between 80% and 120% of bioequivalence or bioavailability for the most part. With the filing, there's a certification. So there's a paragraph 3 certification where the generic may say all the patents that are listed, we are not seeking approval until the last of those to expire. And then there's a paragraph 4 certification where the generic certifies to the FDA that the listed patents are either invalid, unenforceable, or not infringed. And with that certification, the filing with the paragraph 4 certification is considered an act of infringement in the United States. And under Hatch-Waxman, it triggers a 45-day period in which to sue the ANDA filer. And that is what ANDA litigation is. So these guys aren't on the market yet. They haven't been approved, but it's that act of certification that triggers the 45-day period. And within an ANDA litigation, you can have a combination of both paragraph 3 and paragraph 4 certifications. They may identify certain patents that they are not going to challenge and that they're not seeking approval until the expiration of those patents. And there may be additional patents where they do challenge. And you see that in litigation where you may have an initial composition of matter patent that is going to expire with an initial indication. And then the follow-on indication patents, method of use for treating different indications or additional indications, they may want to challenge. But there's a lot of strategy that goes into an ANDA filing. As you are aware, there's a case in front of the Supreme Court on skinny labels and what that means. And that's all taken into account in what we do and how we strategically try to position certain patents for our clients to anticipate that ANDA filing.
Can you tell us what a skinny label is? This deals with the labeling that the FDA has said, okay, this is approved for this particular use, right?
Yeah. So you may have a drug that's been approved for multiple indications. And with each of those, there may be a patent associated with it. The composition of matter is the broadest protection, right? So usually when you see a skinny label, what is going on there is that the composition of matter patent is expiring. There are additional patents to additional indications outside of the initially approved indication. And what the generic company is trying to do is avoid litigation around those additional indications. And the way to do that is through a skinny label where they tell the FDA, I'm only seeking approval in my ANDA on this compound for this use. And the particular use that I'm seeking approval on is not patented or the patent will expire by this date. And that is what a skinny label is. So an example, if you've got a PD-L1 inhibitor that was initially approved for treatment of cancer and the PD-L1 inhibitor or CDK4/6 inhibitor or CDK2 inhibitor, you think about it, any treatment, if it is coming off patent, the composition of matter is coming off patent and the original indication patent is coming off, it has no extended term, but Subsequently, there's been additional patents filed around maybe an administrative route or maybe an additional indication or maybe a combination. Generic will file with their ANDA a proposed label that carves out all of those protected indications. And if you compare the ANDA label with the NDA label, it's called skinny because it is skinnier. It's going to be smaller. It's going to be not as long because you're carving out all of those indications where the patents are still in existence.
So, but does that really matter? My understanding, maybe I'm wrong, but like a doctor can prescribe these drugs for off-label reasons, right? It's the medical professional who decides, well, I'm going to treat you with drug A for reason X, even though drug A is only approved for reason Y. That's perfectly fine in the medical world, right?
That's absolutely correct. And the truth of the matter is the skinny label, if you look at the data around a generic coming on the market within about 6 months, 180 days, there's significant brand erosion up to about 80% and sometimes greater. The fact that I have additional patents on other indications, when the generic comes on, doctors know, they know that the same drug's approved for these different indications. And even though the generic label may not spell it out, the off-label use occurs. It certainly does. Now, there are restrictions, and that's what the HICMA case is about at the Supreme Court. How far can I go as a generic if I have a skinny label? What can I do marketing-wise that allows me to not run into infringement allegations? And that's what the skinny label case is about at the Supreme Court at the moment.
It's interesting. It strikes me as like a difference without a distinction, really. Like you can have this enter the market, but only wink, wink, nod, nod for A, not for B. But it gets used for B anyway. And
It does.
This gets us into maybe the conversation about money, right? Because it's a huge business for generics because they don't have to invent anything. They just get to copy. And I like paying generic prices just like everybody else does. Like it's great, right? But somewhere along the way, an innovator had to actually innovate and protect this and then go through what are extraordinarily expensive trials that get harder and harder and harder. The whole process could take 8, 10, 12 years to get through the FDA. And then you get Johnny come lately come in, skips to the front of the line. Yeah, they can't start this until 4 or 5 years after approval. But then they parachute in, and the minute they parachute in, you get 80% erosion. And it's like, well, So this is why paradigm shifting, groundbreaking pharmaceuticals cost so damn much because they may only get a 5-year lifespan. A lot on the table there. Let me throw one other thing on the table to make sure it gets out there. I was at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, and there was an event there, and then they were talking about the cost of clinical trials and clinical trials, some people trying to do them in China, but there's some problems with that because you can't just have Chinese data because regulators in the U.S. like to see that, well, does this work for other than Asians? And it's a big question, right? Which markets does this work for? Does it work for Caucasians? Does it work for African Americans? Does it work for people of Latin descent? So you can't just have China trials, but it's cheaper in China. But then they said, and it's also cheaper in, I think it was Portugal. And they said on the order, maybe it was Spain. It was either Spain or Portugal. You can get somebody enrolled in a clinical trial for $18,000 a person. And to get that similar person in the U.S. enrolled in the same clinical trial would cost $120,000 per person. That's like 8x. I mean, what's going on? I mean, are these the numbers, and why is it so damn expensive in the U.S.?
Yeah, I mean, those are the numbers. And the other area that a lot of branded pharmaceutical biotech companies look for with regard to clinical trials is Eastern Europe. It's just much cheaper. And I think at the end of the day, it has to do with the general cost of healthcare here in the United States versus these other jurisdictions. And you see that reflected in the cost of the clinical trial, where you're trialing here in the U.S. versus these other jurisdictions. And remember what goes on in the clinical trial. Company is paying. So there are contracts. There's contracts with the clinical trial site. There's remuneration. There's payment of the treatment, sometimes all of the treatment for the patient during that time period. There's continuing follow-up costs. When you put people on a clinical trial drug and it starts to work, You don't just take them off. So there's ongoing obligations around that. The trials do get expensive. It is incredibly expensive to do trials. And then to add to that, you've got to establish statistical significance. That's where you see, a lot of these trials that have such beautiful data in phase 2 and then go to phase 3 as required by the FDA in certain situations. The trial is much bigger. And what they were seeing in phase 2, statistically over a broader, often more heterogeneous population, doesn't work. It just statistically, the efficacy is not there. And that's where you really see a lot of the cost. Now, if you're looking at the cost of trialing, the failure rate, for example, in oncology, 90% of all drugs in the oncology field that start a clinical trial are not approved. And adding that all together with research and development costs, NDA cost, all the regulatory issues that are around the approval, the CMC or the manufacturing and the quality control and all that goes into that in the preclinical testing and the animal testing and toxicity testing. And you can see it's just the enormous cost that's built in just to getting to the approval stage. And you noted, and I noted earlier, that the 5-year exclusivity on a small molecule in the United States, it really, if you think about it, that 5-year period begins on day 1. Well, you may not be in a position as a pharmaceutical company to take advantage of that approval in day 1. There's a significant delay in uptake for a lot of drugs. The big blockbusters, where it's first in class and there's no other treatment available, those get picked up a lot quicker. But, for most drugs, it does take a minute to get picked up by the medical community. And so there's a delay there. And that's why patents are so critical in the space, because the regulatory exclusivities that are available may not be sufficient to even pay for much of the development cost, half of the development cost. So it's a criticality in this country on drug development. People are constantly trying to find ways to do these studies in a more reasonable financial fashion. I think the study designs that I have seen over my career have been much more focused, at least with, indications that we're dealing with. It just seems to be a much more strategic approach to clinical trialing today than maybe 20 years ago. And that is all because of the enormous costs.
My understanding that to get a drug approved, the average, so there'll be less, there'll be more, and this is dated several years at least, is around $2.5 billion.
Yeah, it ranges, right? I mean, it also, again, part of the issue is at the FDA and what patient population they want to see. I think part of what we've seen, what I have seen in the United States, drug development-wise, was a switch to initial approvals in smaller populations where they may not have been a lot of options, and orphan drug status is available, which provides additional exclusivity for you. And part of that is because of the design of the clinical trial. I mean, it's a statistical issue. What is my N? How many patients do I need to treat to get approval if we show efficacy? And it is as complicated as the patent world in pharma is, the regulatory world is just as complicated, if not more. There's just so much that goes into it, and it has so much regulation. The resource requirements for a company to be able to navigate that it's enormous. I just think of all of the companies I've worked with in my career and all of the people that I know through these various different aspects of making a drug. It seems so simple. Came up with something, it works, but it's not. It's a long road. It's a complicated road. You have to overcome hurdles. At the end of the day, you get on the market, and guess what? You can look forward to a challenge in 5 years.
Yeah, guaranteed if it's successful. And
guaranteed.
That's the one thing that when we talk about averages for how much does it actually take to get a drug from somebody's, oh, this would be interesting thought process to all the way through FDA approval and in the market is probably extremely misleading, because you've already mentioned orphan drugs. And it's my understanding orphan drugs, is it 200,000 people suffer from?
I think so. And to maybe two below 200 or 250.
Yeah.
I don't know the exact, but it's around that.
In that ballpark. So certainly if it was going to cost $2 to $3 billion to get something that only 200,000 people or less are going to get benefit from, then nobody would do it, right? So there seems like there's got to be this sliding scale approach, but regulators need to make sure that these things, one, are safe, two, are efficacious, which are different questions. One is it going to kill you? That's the safety question. The efficacious thing is well, is this appreciably better than a placebo? And if not, then why are we going to allow people to take it, And then on top of that, you have the layers of, as we already were talking about, the FDA won't let you just have Chinese data, because you need to make sure that this has applicability across races and, across for men and for women and across different ethnicities. And I suppose, like, if this is going to be a drug that, maybe this is the question just to confirm, but if you're going to have a drug that is going to be widely available to everyone, think of, painkiller, or if you could come out with like a painkiller that has the same pain killing profile as an opioid with no addiction possibility. I mean, that would be like a blockbuster, right? So everybody's going to take that, going to get prescribed like crazy, right? And so you're going to have to make sure every population is safe for and have information about it, and who's it not safe for. And then that's where you get these commercials where you hear, oh my God, the side effects, right? Well, you know what they are because they've tested it. I would think that the more broad appeal the drugs have, the more the FDA is going to demand. And if it's an orphan drug, not to say they don't care about efficacy and they don't care about safety, but they want to try and get these things to help people in populations where it's just not cost effective otherwise, right?
Yeah, and I think on the orphan side, I think part of the calculus there is obviously exactly what you say. There's no treatment. So you're generally dealing with first-in-class treatments, which the FDA, you do get some advantages. You get, accelerated consideration, those types of regulatory avenues that are available. But it also, in a sense, limits the size of the trials, right? I may not have to show or have 1,300 people or 2,500 people in a trial if it's a orphan designated indication. I think that's part of the calculus. And proof of concept, right? So a lot of these, especially in the oncology world, where you might have a mechanism of action that may be similar across potentially different cancer types, but you may want to start with the smaller population cancer where, there's no approval or no viable treatments, and start there for quicker approval and then go on to the next one, because it does de-risk to a sense. It de-risks the clinical trials if you can keep them smaller. And again, this is I'm not a regulatory attorney, but this is what I have seen over the last, 25 years of practice in dealing with clients and how they generally approach these populations. And, how do I get a drug to market that is going to help the patient population we're seeking to treat?
And that's the name of the game, right? I mean, I've talked to a number of innovators in the pharmaceutical space, and the people who come up with these great ideas, often they are at universities, they're at R&D centers, hospitals. Sometimes they are at the big companies, but often the big companies wind up partnering with the dreamer who's an academic or the dreamer who works at this particular research hospital, because those folks want to do better for humanity. I've never talked to any of these people that came up with these like really great drugs or treatments, and their motivation was, oh, I want to get rich. No, their motivation to a person is, I want to help people.
No, I 100% agree. And, unfortunately, the cost of development dictates the cost of the drug once approved. And, it's an unfortunate side effect, no pun intended, of the process. So I agree with you. I mean, the people that we have worked with, I mean, when drug gets approved, it's a great feeling for them, and it's a great feeling for us as well, knowing that we were a part of it on the patent side. which, may seem like a small minor aspect. But as we've discussed before, without patents, you're not even getting these drugs developed. The United States government's not doing it. NIH isn't picking these up and doing these trials anymore. No one's doing it. It's got to be in the private sector, and you have to be able to have more than 5 years of exclusivity in the marketplace.
Yeah. So the one other thing that really interests me about this is it seems exactly backwards to me when people are like, they look at the big drug prices, they're like, oh my God, these prices are so high, which of course they're high, right? When they first come out, I get that they're high relative to that never existed before. Now it does exist. People don't look at it like that. I think they should, but okay, so it's high. And what I think we could probably all agree on, whatever a new drug comes out, it's going to cost more than you want it to cost, more than you want to pay. And why that shocks anybody, I don't know. As a consumer, you want to pay less. As a creator, you want to charge more. That's just humanity. That's the human condition, right? So none of this should be that surprising. But the solution often from the critics is to just say, oh, well, we got to get rid of these patents, or we need to rush generics onto the market even quicker. And to me, that's like the exact opposite of what we should be doing. If these things are so expensive because of all the cost that goes into them, maybe what we ought to do is look about extending the data exclusivity. Maybe we should extend the patent life and let the innovator amortize their investment over a longer period of time. And that would cause the price to drop, right? Now, it would delay generic entry. But if you're going to speed up generic entry, all you're doing is you're going to require these people to be charging more and more and more and more. And the older I get, what I see in so many solutions is, well, I understand the problem. I understand what you're trying to do. And that solution is going to make it worse, not better. But people just are so married to loving this idea that get generics there quick. And if we could say tomorrow, generics are on the market in 1 year. Right. And what's that going to do? The price is either going to have to go so high almost nobody can afford it for that year, and or a big chunk of them are never going to happen because you can't charge that much, and people are going to lose money.
Yeah, just 2 points to that. One, the system does work. You do get generics. Every new drug that comes out will be genericized at some point. And so from that standpoint, there is a tremendous benefit to downstream patients in this system. It may not be the efficacy and the treatment of the initial patient population, like you say, is a value in and of itself. It's at a higher cost, but that same drug today is going to be genericized down the line, and you're going to get the benefits of that discovery and the efficacy of that discovery, the treatment of that discovery, potential cures at a much lower cost over time, given our Hatch-Waxman approach. And so in that sense, I think people forget that, that drug will be ultimately genericized. And that's I think a good thing for the American public. With respect to incentivizing, I mean, I love that you raised that, because with the Inflation Reduction Act, right, that was passed a few years ago with drug negotiations, it's like the top 10 drugs, cost or spend that are up or subject to this negotiation. Now think about that. What if you've taken a look at what those drugs are? They address the American population's most pressing medical conditions: heart disease, kidney disease, diabetes. It's always a cancer. It's always these classes of drugs that are up at the IRA. And I always thought, what a perverse incentive that if I come up with a drug that addresses the need of significant proportions of our society, I'm going to penalize you, and I'm going to make you knock the cost of that drug down. I always thought if we had an incentivized regime where those drugs that address those needs, that address the most pressing needs, they get an extension, and instead of the IRA coming and being some punitive, regime, we have one that says, hey, look, if you have really good efficacy with kidney disease that reduces overall costs of that treatment, we're going to reward you with a 2-year extension. Something like that, because I can tell you one thing that I try to educate people on with regards to pharmaceutical biotech costs is that it's still a very small proportion of overall healthcare costs in this country. It runs about 12% of spend on healthcare, and it is always better to be able to take a small white pill for chronic kidney disease than to have to go down and get dialysis. It's going to be cheaper. And there's so many things over the past 20 years that I've seen where you are getting significant advantages through the drug that weren't available prior to its existence, and that do reduce the overall cost and burden on healthcare in this country. And I try to remind people of that. I mean, Sovaldi is a perfect example, the Gilead drug for HCV. I mean, before that, ultimately, you were looking at a liver replacement if you had HCV. Now you take Sovaldi, and generally for most genotypes or serotypes of HCV, it cures you. And the difference in cost, even at the cost that that drug was sold at, is significant. And you get the advantage of that drug going generic here in the near future. So I think the system works on the ultimate genericism. I do think you would probably see more drugs on the market, riskier challenges, and people taking a bigger risk if we did have a little more extension. And what I mean by a bigger risk, very hard to treat conditions, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, these types of conditions where there are treatments, but they may not be the best treatment or the most efficacious. And I think part of that is because those are tough indications, and the risk is enormous. And maybe the payout over time, given the resources that would be forced or spent on trying to develop such a drug, it may not be there.
There's a couple things that come to mind. One of the things I always tell people is the worse you feel when you go to the pharmacy, the lower your cost of medicine is going to be, because somebody else somewhere along the way invented that many years ago, and now it's generic and it costs almost nothing. The generic system we have works very well in a lot of respects. I do worry about the incentive problem. And this is an issue not just in the life sciences area. I think it's across all areas for reasons that make no sense to me. What you see is the law structured in a way that it is driving innovators to try and hit singles and doubles. Because if you hit a home run, and God forbid you hit a grand slam home run, and God forbid you hit a grand slam home run in the bottom of the ninth inning to win the World Series, you're going to have challenges out the wazoo. People are going to want to take it away from you. They're going to want price controls. They're going to want every other thing. So just like every other incentive, and everybody should get this, right? Like the tax code, it incentivizes activity. We know it works. We know there's psychological studies, there's practice, it works. You give people tax cuts, they do certain things. You give them write-offs, they do certain things. And innovation is no different. If you make it more lucrative to hit singles and doubles, that's what companies are going to try and do. And that is good for society. I'm not saying a single and a double is not what we want, but what I really want is I want the next antibiotic, because we need antibiotics because of antibiotic resistance, right? I want cures to cancer. I want cures for Alzheimer's and Parkinson's.
Yeah, no, I don't disagree. And I find it interesting whenever you discuss pharmaceuticals and in the context of patents as well. I think most Americans, when they think of patents, they think of the guy in the garage tinkering, right? And then being able to go and reap the benefits of his invention. And that's kind of what the patent system is. But for some reason, it seems to be excluded in a large part of Americans' minds for pharmaceutical companies. And it's that same process. I mean, like you say, when you start when you talk with the inventors, the scientists, it's not like these guys just came up with this idea and woe and behold, there it is. There is an incredible amount of effort that goes into, even on the initial front of coming up with a molecule. that may treat something. I mean, it is not something that I just wake up with the aha moment with. There's a lot that goes into that. And these people care, and it's expensive. It's a shame that it's as expensive as it is, but I don't know what other course of action you can take or what you would change outside of trying to reduce the bureaucratic requirements or the clinical trial requirements and those costs, which can be done, but it's going to be marginal. And I think we all recognize that. But at the end of the day, people want new treatments. I mean, we have to have them. If we didn't, we're stuck with what we have. And there's a very heterogeneous population in this country, and the ills are long and wide, and what can be addressed and what can't. I mean, you almost have to, depending on what disorder you get or disease you might be facing, you could be very unlucky in the sense that there's nothing there. And I'm sorry, the doctor tells you there's nothing we can do versus some other population that you happen to get. And what is that distinction? And sometimes it's the distinction of that guy that is working on that other issue that there's no treatment for, hasn't found anything yet, but he may still be looking, but we have to incentivize him to do so. And part of that, again, unfortunately, it is money. I mean, it's a return. That's the way the world works. This stuff isn't free, and drugs don't fall off of trees. I mean, it's an enormous effort. The scientific effort that goes into getting a single drug approved through the United States FDA is enormous. And I wish, again, the pharma industry did a better job of educating people on that. And the miracles that we've seen recently, like I said, it's a golden age of immunotherapy. I mean, multiple myeloma and CAR T, some of those stories where during the trial, the clinical trial, I mean, these stage 4 individuals who were literally in the twilight of their life and get a CAR T treatment for multiple myeloma that cures them. I mean, what a just absolutely amazing occurrence, and that it's just fascinating, and it's wonderful to be a part of and to see. But at the same time, we got to make sure that keeps happening.
Absolutely. And, if the people who are the inventors in this space had a limitless supply of their own money, then they wouldn't need to have investors. But that's just not the way the world works. The innovators have great ideas, big dreams. They want to accomplish something. And we need to have it be such that the companies, the angel investors, all the way up to the largest corporation in the world can see the benefit of investing in this along the way. And that's what gets us more of this treatment. But Brent, that was a fascinating conversation. I really appreciate you being here today.
Yeah, I appreciate you having me. It was great.
Thank you for listening to IP Watchdog Unleashed. We will be back next week, and we hope you will join us again. In the meantime, please be sure to visit IPWatchdog.com to read all the latest news and information about what is happening in the intellectual property world. And also be sure to subscribe to our free daily email newsletter.